Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and today is October 3rd, which abortion advocates tend to observe this anniversary in a very dramatic, melodramatic way, and I expect they're really going to pull out all the stops now in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And it's interesting to know the story and look at their logic. In 1976, the Hyde Amendment went into effect, banning the use of federal funds to pay for abortions except to save the mother from an immediate threat to her life. The measure was named for its author, Congressman Henry Hyde. Now, from the moment the measure was put up to date, abortion proponents were keening. They painted a ghastly picture of coat hanger impaled women littering the streets as poor women were driven to desperation by lack of access. And when the amendment went into effect, they hyped up the hysteria and waited for a death, any death they could hang around Henry Hyde's neck. And October 3rd of 1977, those abortion advocacy vultures got what they'd been waiting for, a dead woman they could use as leverage to fight to once again force taxpayers to fund elective abortions. Now, their triumph started playing out on September 26, 1977, when 27-year-old Rosie Jimenez showed up at the emergency room of McAllen General Hospital in the Texas border town of McAllen. She was desperately sick with septic shock. She denied having had an abortion, instead telling the doctors that her period had just started. But as they examined and treated her, it became very clear that she was suffering from a septic abortion. The doctors pulled out all the stops to try to save her. She wound up in the intensive care unit. They performed a hysterectomy. They were giving her medications to try to get her blood to clot properly. But in spite of all their efforts, Rosie died on October 3rd from renal failure and cardiac failure caused by the clotting disorder triggered by gas gangrene from a criminal abortion, and she left behind a 4-year-old daughter. The abortion lobby's response to Rosie's death was little short of euphoric. They had their trophy, their dead woman that they could leverage, they hoped, for the restoration of tax money flowing into the abortion clinics. There was one voice that stood out from the crowd, Ellen Frankfurt, who eventually wrote a book called Rosie, The Investigation of a Wrongful Death. Frankfurt was disgusted with the bulk of the pro-choice movement, who seemed content to make note of the death and milk it for political gain. She began an investigation into what the CDC and abortion advocacy organizations showed no interest in. What was it that had led Rosie to her death? They weren't looking for the real culprit. They'd had a boogeyman in mind before she'd even undergone the fatal abortion in the form of Henry Hyde. So Ellen Frankfurt went off to McAllen to learn all that she could. So Rosie was one of 12 children of migrant farm workers. A single mother on welfare, she and a friend named Diana Rivera moved into adjacent apartments to encourage each other to complete higher education and build better lives for themselves and their young children. Rosie planned to become a special education teacher. She had already undergone 2 abortions at taxpayer expense, one performed by a private OB/GYN and another at a facility that Planned Parenthood had referred her to. She had become pregnant before both of those abortions after a doctor had recommended that she go off her birth control pills. In September of 77, she suspected that she was pregnant again, and she consulted with a cousin and a friend who both told her that Medicaid would no longer pay for elective abortions. Rosie also went to her family doctor and told him that she thought he might be pregnant. He didn't arrange for a pregnancy test. He didn't discuss any options with her. He just told her that, sorry, no more free abortions, and left it at that. He did nothing to help her. He did not refer her to a pregnancy center that would have helped her have her baby. He did not even refer her to the local Planned Parenthood that could have arranged for an abortion on a sliding scale or could have possibly helped her tap into private funds for an elective abortion. So he essentially abandoned his patient. Now, the week after she went to the doctor, Rosie went to Mexico for some sort of injection to try to cause an abortion. She went to a pharmacy and paid $5, and the first injection didn't do anything for her. So she went back and had a second injection that just gave her nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and made her faint. But she was still pregnant. On September 25th, she consulted with a cousin saying that she wanted to find a cheap abortionist quickly. So at 7 o'clock that evening, Rosie's cousin didn't bring her to Planned Parenthood, brought her to Maria Pineda, a lay midwife in McAllen, who charged $120 to insert a catheter into Rosie's uterus. And 15 minutes later, she sent Rosie home. Now, Rosie had pain and cramping when she got home, and over the next 12 hours, she developed increasing fever, nausea, vomiting, chills, dizziness, and increased vaginal bleeding. The next afternoon, she was unable to even get out of bed and asked a friend to take her to the hospital, where, of course, she died. Now, even the Centers for Disease Control, supposedly politically neutral public servants, were poised to place the blame on the Hyde Amendment for whatever ill-advised decisions were made in its wake. Rosie's doctors reported the death to the CDC, and the CDC notified their allies in the abortion lobby, and Rosie's death was quickly trumpeted nationwide as proof that Henry Hyde was a murderer, and taxpayers should immediately restore funding for elective abortions to prevent another such death. Notice, by the way, that there is no appalling situation from a legal abortion death that makes them want to prevent another such death. Those they just shrug off. All surgery has risks. Yeah, Kermit Gosnell had high school dropouts doping women within inches of their lives. Nobody knew how to perform CPR. There was no crash cart. The medics couldn't even get her out of the building without having to get bolt cutters. No problem. Those kind of deaths we don't need to prevent. Only deaths like Rosie's. So what I find particularly telling is that pro-choice groups have been very successful in spreading the word that public funding for abortions had been cut. Rosie's friends, her cousin, her physician were all aware of this fact. But they didn't pass along the information that Planned Parenthood still referred for sliding scale abortions and that private funds were available. So it's almost like the public relations department of Planned Parenthood and other abortion advocacy groups had deliberately increased the odds of a tragedy like Rosie's death in order to provide the corpse they needed to prop up a drive to get that tax money going back into abortion clinics. And Frankfurt was particularly disgusted with the response of public health officials, who likewise simply announced Rosie's death and began a call to restore abortion funding, but made no effort to identify or close down the midwife that had performed the abortion that killed Rosie. So Frankfurt took it upon herself to orchestrate a sting. She coordinated a raid in partnership with Rosie's close friend Diana Rivera that put the abortionist out of business. So, of course, the woman was arrested, and the outcome was extremely disappointing. This woman, who had killed somebody by performing an illegal abortion, was merely convicted of practicing medicine without a license, which was a Class A misdemeanor. She spent 3 days in jail and paid a $100 fine. They didn't even fine her as much as she charged Rosie for the fatal abortion. Now, what about all the hysteria? Had it been justified? Was Rosie's death the first of a new trend of women dead from being forced to resort to criminal abortions? Well, there was indeed a small spike in reported illegal abortion deaths after the Hyde Amendment, from 2 in 1976 to 4 in 1977 and 7 in 1978. But there was also a spike in reported legal abortion deaths, a far larger spike, from 11 in 76 to 17 in 77. Now, I don't believe the CDC numbers are accurate, but they're all they have to work with. So, despite the prediction of a surge in carnage from criminal abortions, a study by the CDC, The Effects of Restricting Public Funds for Legal Abortion, which follow my link, the link below to Rosie's story, I do include a link to that study, found, quote, no evidence of a statistically significant increase in the number of complications from illegal abortions. In fact, they found the opposite. Some states decided that they were going to pick up the tab for elective abortions. In those states, there was no change in hospitalizations for either illegal or legal abortion complications. But in states that didn't pick up the tab, where the Hyde Amendment meant no more free elective abortions, admissions for complications among Medicaid-eligible women actually dropped. That meant cutting funds for elective abortions had a measurable positive impact. Fewer women were ending up hospitalized for abortion complications. Now that strikes me as a good thing personally, but the CDC and, of course, all the abortion rights advocates still screamed that we need to pony up the money to prevent women from having unsafe abortions, even though it seemed to certainly reduce the number of unsafe abortions when you don't pay for them. Now, was Rosie's death just a fluke? I don't think so. I think the heavy publicity that the pro-choice movement put out about how poor women would be forced to resort to dangerous abortions left Rosie, probably her friends and others like her, with the mistaken impression that criminal abortion, rather than having her baby or a sliding scale safe and legal abortion, was their only action. And it was only after the sting, when Frankfurt and Rosie's friends banded together, that abortion funds were publicized and new ones started. And I recognize that Rosie's friends, and probably most of the women on the front lines, had noble motives. They want women to be able to afford safe abortions. I really have questions about the motives of abortion rights organizations. I don't think they care where the money comes from, as long as it goes into the abortion clinics. So I agree that Rosie's death was avoidable, but I disagree that public funding being cut was to blame. Pro-choice organizations had ample opportunity to tout other resources. People all around Rosie, including her doctor, could have steered her to a safe legal abortion if they had chosen to do so. None of them did, and nobody even seemed to entertain the notion that abortion might not be the answer in the first place. And what's additionally puzzling is that the facility Planned Parenthood would have referred her to would have charged her only $130, just $10 more than she paid for the amateur abortion that took her life. And I find it really hard to believe that that $10 price difference put the legal abortion out of Rosie's reach, especially if we consider that the day before the abortion, she'd spent $10 on a cake for a friend's baby shower, and when she died, she had an $800 scholarship check in her purse, and her friend Diana had offered to help her raise the money for a legal abortion. For some reason, Rosie refused Diana's help and instead went to the midwife while Diana was out of town visiting her mother. So Rosie Jimenez remains a poster child for the abortion lobby. Their own role in her death is never acknowledged. They blame Henry Hyde instead, in spite of his key role in passing a law that reduced abortion injuries among women like Rosie, and by reducing complications, probably also reduced abortion deaths in spite of the abortion lobby's best efforts. As recently as last year, the abortion lobby put Rosie's daughter on the front page in an effort to again promote the abortion lobby. They claim their motive is to prevent unsafe abortion, but given their appalling opposition to any efforts to actually make sure that legal abortions are performed any more safely than what that midwife was doing, I have my doubts.